Good day, everyone. I am Mr. Lawrence Amateur, your senior high school instructor and English language specialist here at the University of Perpetual Help System Delta, Calamba campus. Our session today will focus on an essential topic in practical research too, the categories of quantitative research. Let us keep in mind our guiding mission to take a hand, teach a mind, touch a heart, and transform a life through the power of research. Now let us have our learning objectives. By the end of the session, you are expected to describe the various kinds of quantitative research. You'll be able to illustrate its importance across fields and distinguish between and among different types of variables and their uses. Moreover, you will develop your ability to construct a sound quantitative research design and demonstrate a positive attitude in applying research to real-world situations. These objectives will guide our learning journey today. And let us now delve into Lesson 4, which is about the categories of quantitative research. We are referencing the work of Apuke 2017, which gives us a strong foundation in understanding the four main types. There are four categories of quantitative research: survey research, correlational research, experimental research, and causal comparative research. Each has its own methods, purpose, and application. So let's begin with survey research. Survey research involves collecting data through questionnaires. It is one of the most commonly used methods in quantitative studies due to its versatility and scalability. The data collected through survey is first tallied, second is analyzed statistically, and what comes next is the presentation. It will now be presented. Okay, and because of this, after these processes, there come now the formation, or we have now the formulation of our findings and recommendations. So we have different methods of survey research. The first one is face-to-face, second is phone, and then the third one is online or email. Now let's have the first one, face-to-face. This is the most common means necessary to be employed when there are complicated issues that a researcher would like to address. A lot of researchers have been employing this, considering the possibility of obtaining highest rates of responses as compared to the other means, although it may entail costs when you utilize this method of survey research. The next one is phone. So this is another useful method in collecting data for survey research from a larger section of the target population. So that's number 2, phone. And the last method of survey research is online or email. It is one of the most prevalent survey research methods nowadays, considering the technological advancement of the present time. The cost is less, but there's a drawback. The response rates are lower compared to the other methods of survey. So here are the 3 methods of survey research. We have face-to-face, phone, and online or email. So this time, let's come now to the 2 classifications of survey research based on time taken. We have longitudinal survey research and cross-sectional survey research. So the first one is longitudinal survey research. So this one involves data gathering which can be accomplished within a long period of time, which may be spread across decades and years. The researcher will regularly observe over time the respondents' attitude, perception, behavior, and the like, thus providing the researcher or researchers sufficient data for a better understanding of the phenomena. So let's come now to cross-sectional survey research. So here it can either be analytical or descriptive in nature. So the researcher here obtains insights from a specific audience or respondents at a definite interval of time or a relatively short period of time to scrutinize the relationship between variables and other variables of interest as they exist in a defined population at a single point in time or over a short period of time. It is helpful in establishing a credible undertaking in the various fields like education, healthcare, and business. So here are the two classifications of survey research based on time taken. So let's come now to the process of implementation, the process of implementing survey. So we have here 4 processes, so let's have each one. So the first one is design the survey question. Take note, anchor your survey questions on the research objectives or problem statements or statements of the problem. And make sure that the survey questions are grammatically and logically appropriate. Another thing here is you have to consider the respondent's ability to answer the questionnaire within the allotted time. And your survey questions may include multiple choice questions or close-ended questions. And the ideal type actually of the survey questions is a combination of open-ended and close-ended questions. And this one, under this process, it can avoid fence sitting by using the following in survey questions like Likert scale, score questions, and the like. Next process is finalizing the target audience. So here, decide who the respondents are, who really the respondents are, and the necessary sampling method. So your respondents must be reliable and credible based on the standard set in the study, set by you as researchers. And take note as well that your target audience should be numerous enough to represent the target population. And of course, take note, because we are talking about our audience, our respondents, we have to really make sure to observe Data Privacy Act. Okay. So here, our third step, identifying the medium of survey administration. So, in short, consider the survey's research method. So we have actually 3, if you can still remember them. Okay, we have face-to-face, we have phone, and we have online or email. Okay, now, what's the paramount significance in the researcher's decision? Okay, what are the different considerations that the researchers should reckon with? The first one is the convenience on the part of the researcher to obtain the essential data for the undertaking. Next is the urgency of obtaining the data or data based on the time frame. The third one is the quality of data that may be obtained through the medium used. And finally, the expenses that may be incurred in the survey administration. Again, so here are the four things that you have to remember. The four considerations: the urgency, the quality, the expenses, and also the convenience. Okay? And the last process of implementation is analyzing the survey results. So here, the researchers should do the reading or analysis of the results in real time, considering the impact it could bring to the organization. Should it be given credence by the concerned people in the soonest possible time? And another thing, this could give meaning and relevance to the data obtained. So that's the last process, analyzing the survey results. So at this point, let's talk about now the different purposes of survey research. Okay, take note of this. Survey research helps us understand behavior, perceptions, and can foster meaningful discussions. It also serves as a continuous improvement tool in various sectors. So we're done with survey research. We come now to the second one, which is correlational research. Okay, correlational research seeks to determine if the variables two or more are related, and if related, in what way. Another thing, yes, it examines relationships between two or more naturally occurring variables, but take note, without manipulating them. Without manipulating these naturally occurring variables. Now we mentioned the naturally occurring variable. So what is that? What does it mean? So a naturally occurring variable is a natural variable. And this variable is not manipulated. Examples, we have level of customer satisfaction, study habits, and quality of life. So, for instance, a study might explore how youth engagement in social media relates to their study habits. So, our variables here are the social media engagement by the youth and the study habits of the youth. Okay, so we will now find, so as we go along with the research process, we will find the relationship between social media engagement and the study habits of this youth. Here in correlational research class, we use this statistical measure that gauges the strength of the relationship between and among the variables. We call it the correlation coefficient, with values ranging from -1 to +1. And also remember, a value near +1 means there is a strong positive correlation. Near -1, there is a strong negative correlation. And near to 0 indicates no relationship. So here we look at the correlation between language proficiency and the school from which students graduated. So obviously our variables here are the language proficiency and the school where the respondents graduated. Okay. Now here, based on the sample study, okay, this is the research finding. This, however, does not necessarily mean that the students who graduated from other schools are not capable of becoming language proficient. In correlational research, it is not possible to establish the fact what causes what. So here, the meaning or the research finding is there is a negative correlation between the two variables, the language proficiency and the school where the students graduated. So there is a negative correlation. Now here's the misconception under correlational research that the correlational research involves two quantitative variables, but in fact, correlational research doesn't require two quantitative variables to be manipulated. It measures both as they are. Now, we have here the three types of correlation: the positive, the negative, and no correlation. Now, let me explain each type. Okay, so the first one is positive correlation. So here, when one variable increases, the other variable also increases. And when one variable decreases, then the other variable also decreases. So it only means that under positive correlation, there is this direct proportion, or they are directly proportional. For example, social media engagement and self-perceived confidence. Okay? And another thing, demand and supply. If there is an increase on the demand, then there also an increase on the supply, and vice versa. If there is a decrease in the demand, and of course, certainly there is a decrease on the supply. So that's what we call positive correlation. Now we have negative correlation. So here, when one variable increases, the other variable decreases. And when one variable decreases, the other variable increases. So here, the variables are inversely proportional. Okay, for example, if there is this high academic stress, so there is this low sleep duration. Okay, just like that. And if there is this less academic stress, then there is this more sleep time. Okay, more duration of sleep time. Okay, so that's all about negative correlation. And finally, no correlation means when two variables are not correlated, meaning a change in one variable may not have a necessary impact on the other variable. For example, let's go back to that study on the social media usage and academic performance. So we can find that there is no correlation, of course, when we did the data collection, and after data collection, the data analysis, and after data analysis, of course, there's now the findings. Okay? Now, we already mentioned data collection. So we under correlational research, we have two. We have naturalistic observation and archival data. Okay, so let's take a closer look at how data collected in correlational research. Now, the first one is naturalistic observation. So it involves collecting data or data by observing subjects in their natural environment without any interference. This method allows researchers to study behavior as it occurs organically For instance, if you're researching how students interact during group work, you might quietly observe a class session without influencing what the students do. So this is an example of naturalistic observation. Okay? On the other hand, we have archival data. It involves analyzing existing data or records that were collected for another purpose. This could include previously published research, school records, survey data from government agencies, or social media analytics. It is especially useful when direct observation isn't possible or when long-term trends need to be examined. Both methods are non-intrusive and do not involve manipulating any variables, which makes them ideal for correlational studies. They provide rich, real-world data that help researchers identify meaningful patterns. Okay, so we're done with survey and correlational. Let's come now to experimental. Okay, so experimental research class involves scientific approach. And here, where a set of variables are preserved constant, whereas the other set of variables are being measured as the subject of the experiment. So there is this control variable and of course the experimental variable. Okay. In case, class, that the researcher cannot obtain enough data, experiments will be done to discover facts. Okay. Now, under experimental research, of course, there is this laboratory testing. So, success is achieved when we can show that changes in the dependent variable result solely from changes in the independent variable. Again, the success is achieved when we can show that changes in the dependent variable result solely from changes in the independent variable. So, the manipulation of the independent variable. So this time, presenting some situations where experimental research may be done. The first one is time is a vital factor for establishing a relationship between cause and effect. So this method is best when time is crucial, behavior is consistent, and there is a strong cause-effect relationship or strong cause-effect relationship are desired. So there. Next, invariable behavior between cause and effect. What does it mean? It refers to a consistent and predictable relationship between a cause and its corresponding effect. This means that whenever a specific cause occurs, the same effect will always follow without variation. For example, here an example. If a certain action or condition reliably leads to a particular outcome, regardless of external factors, the behavior is considered invariable. So this concept is often used in scientific studies to describe deterministic relationships where the effect is always the same as long as the cause remains constant. Okay, so for example, photosynthesis. Okay, so there is this deterministic relationships if the needed components or needed elements to manufacture the plant of their food, then they will have, or photosynthesis will always occur. So that's what we call invariable behavior. Okay? Next, the eminence of cause-effect relationship is as per desirability. So here, it suggests that the significance or importance of a cause and effect relationship depends on how desirable or valuable the outcome is considered. In other words, class, the more desirable or beneficial the effect or outcome, the more prominent or valued the cause-effect relationship becomes. Class, this idea highlights that the perceived importance of a cause-effect relationship may be influenced by the positive or negative consequences that are associated with it. So that's the third situation. So we come now to the different advantages of experimental research. So the first one is here. So one key advantage of experimental research is that researchers have a stronger hold over variables. This means that the researcher has the ability to control, manipulate, and isolate variables to test specific hypotheses. Again, to control, manipulate, and isolate variables. Remember, which one is, or which variable could be manipulated? Is it dependent or independent? Okay, remember that. Okay, answer that question, that rhetorical question. So, by controlling the independent variable, okay, so that's the answer. And holding other factors constant, the researcher ensures that any change in the dependent variable is directly caused by the manipulation. This level of control leads to more accurate and reliable results. Okay, for example po, in a laboratory experiment studying the effect of light exposure on plant growth, the researcher can standardize water levels, temperature, and soil type, focusing solely on how light changes growth. This control increases the internal validity of the study, helping researchers draw precise cause and effect conclusions. Another important advantage of experimental research is that subject or industry is not limiting a factor. This means po, class, that experimental research can be applied across any discipline or industry, whether it's in education, health, business, agriculture, technology, or manufacturing, name it. Okay? Because the method of experimental research relies on controlled testing of hypotheses. It is universally adaptable. For example po, a marketing company can use experimental research to test the effectiveness of two different advertisements, just as a medical researcher can test the impact of the new drug, bagong gamot. So this flexibility makes experimental research a powerful and versatile tool, regardless of the field. As long as variables can be manipulated and measured, experimental research can be effectively used to generate data-driven conclusions. Okay, continuing the advantages. So we have here, results are extremely specific. Remember, because the researcher controls the conditions and isolates variables, the outcomes are directly linked to the manipulated factor. Which one? Which variable? It's actually the independent variable. So this precision ensures that the conclusions drawn are clear and reliable. Okay, next. What's more on the advantages? Once the results are analyzed. So these findings can be applied to other similar situations or aspects. This is known as generalizability. So number 4, it's all about the generalizability. Okay? For example, if an experimental shows that a particular teaching method improves a student's performance in a school, then the same method might be effectively applied in schools with similar learning conditions. Okay, so in summary, experimental research not only gives highly accurate results, but also enables researchers to extend their applications beyond the original setting. Okay, the fifth advantage is that experimental research allows researchers to establish cause and effect relationships. So we already mentioned this. Ano po? By manipulating one variable and observing changes in another, researchers can directly test whether the independent variable causes an effect on the dependent variable. Okay? So there. Next, additionally, experimental research is highly flexible. So number 6 advantage is all about the flexibility. Okay, it can be used alongside other research methods such as surveys or correlational studies. These combinations allows researchers to gather both quantitative data from controlled experiments and broader contextual insights from other methods. Okay. Okay, there you go. So we're done with survey, correlational, and experimental. So we come now to the last one, causal comparative research. So this approach, causal comparative research, explores cause-effect relationships after an event has occurred, comparing groups based on existing differences. Okay? Now, the goal of causal comparative research is to determine if an independent variable affected the outcome by comparing groups. This is according to Salkind in 2010. So this time, class, according to Maheshwari in 2018, relationships are suggested, not proven, because the independent variable is not manipulated. So that's the meaning of it. Okay, the meaning of this statement. Now, causal comparative research, class, is descriptive in nature. The question is why? Because, in short, it examines events that have already happened. Okay? So let's have an example. In some cases, like leadership styles, researchers cannot teach or alter the behavior, but can still study its impact. Okay, so here, like the leadership style employed by leaders in the organization, the researcher cannot employ someone to teach the leader on the appropriate leadership style, nor teach the leader on how the leadership style is to be implemented. Okay, so that is actually causal comparative research. So let's come now to the different circumstances under causal comparative research. The first one is not capable of being manipulated. Okay, so some variables are not capable of being manipulated, such as age. A person's age is fixed and naturally occurring. Civil status, such as being single, married, or divorced, which cannot be ethically or practically assigned for research purposes. Okay, like gender, a personal and biological characteristic that is not subject to manipulation by the researcher. Okay, another thing, Some variables should not be manipulated. So the first one is not capable of being manipulated. So the second one here should not be manipulated, even if it's technically possible. So the number of visits in a restaurant, altering this may interfere with someone's habits or routines. And then another one, number of companions per visit. Manipulating this would affect personal relationships and social choices, making it ethically questionable. Okay? Because these variables are naturally occurring or sensitive. Causal comparative research uses existing groups rather than assigning participants to condition. What's the goal po, class? The goal is to observe and compare. That's why it is called causal comparative. Observe and compare, not to control or alter. Okay? Then remember, in causal comparative research, we measure how an independent variable, like employment status, relates to one or more dependent variables, such as income or age. Although we don't manipulate variables, we analyze differences between groups to suggest possible cause and effect relationships based on the results. Okay, so here, let's come now to the nature of causal comparative research. The first one is, it is a common design in a research undertaking related to education or academia. Okay, so it pursues to find associations among variables. And another thing, it tries to determine cause and effect. So we already knew it. We already presented this. Another one, the presumed cause and effect which have already occurred are being examined after the fact. So it usually begins with the remarkable difference between variables and then to determine the possible causes or consequences of their difference. The next, if the experiment would not be practical due to time and cost constraints, the causal comparative study can be used as an alternative. That's why it is stated here, it is used if the variables are not examinable using controlled experiments. So here are the different processes under causal comparative research, or the different procedure. So we have identify variables. So here, determine the independent, causal, and the dependent or the effect variables. Second one, formulate hypothesis. So state the expected relationship between the variables. Third is select existing groups. Identify existing groups that differ on the independent variable. Then next, measure variables. Collect data on both the independent and dependent variables for each group. Then finally, analyze data, use statistical tests to compare group differences. So here are the various procedure under causal comparative research. So let's have an example. So the sample is all about the socioeconomic impact of employment status or employment status. This study aims to investigate the relationship between employment status and socioeconomic factors. Specifically, it seeks to determine if there are significant differences in age, gender, and monthly income between employed and underemployed individuals. To achieve this, existing groups of employees were identified based on their employment status. Data on age, gender, and monthly income were then collected from each participant. Statistical analysis, such as t-test or ANOVA, analysis of variables, were conducted to compare the means of these variables between the two groups. The findings, what are the two groups? employed and underemployed individuals. The findings from this study can provide valuable insights into the socioeconomic implications of employment status and inform policy decisions related to labor and social welfare. Now, the question, what are the variables here? Okay. So the variables are, of course, what are the independent variables? Or independent variable, we have employment status. We have employed versus underemployed individuals. Again, this is causal comparative. We are to compare employed individuals and underemployed individuals. What about the dependent variables? We have age, gender, and monthly income. Okay? So here are our variables, both independent and dependent variables. Next, what do you think is the hypothesis of this particular study? So, the hypothesis is employment status has a significant impact on socioeconomic factors such as age, gender, and monthly income. So this is our hypothesis. So we will test if employment status has a significant impact on socioeconomic factors. Okay. Now, what about the existing groups? Okay, existing groups. So the existing groups are there. So employed and underemployed individuals. Okay. So here are the employees based on their employment status. Okay, employed or underemployed. So existing groups of employees were identified based on their employment status as stated here. Okay, well, what about the data needed? What are the data needed here? So, yeah. Okay, so the answer is the data on age, gender, and monthly income. So these are the variables that will be measured. Okay. So collect data on age, gender, and monthly income for each employee in both groups. Age, gender, monthly income for employed. Age, gender, and monthly income for underemployed. Next. Method of data analysis. What do you think is the method of data analysis? Actually, it is already stated there. So there, statistical analysis such as t-tests or ANOVA. Okay. Were conducted to compare the means of these variables between two groups. Okay. So there. So we're done. Mission accomplished. So in summary, the 4 types of quantitative research are survey, correlational, experimental, and causal comparative. Each has its place and strengths in research. So today's content was primarily based on Practical Research 2 by Maranan et al. 2023. So please to consult this material for further study. And there you go. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your listening. Thank you for listening. Continue to apply what you have learned, and remember that through research, you can transform communities and lives. So this has been Sir Lawrence Nachor saying thank you and see you.